This is large numbers that we're having to wrap our heads around here. Why are Republicans quiet on this one?
They're quiet because Trump is not very good on the issue of government spending. He busted the spending caps. He has no desire to tackle entitlements. And it's the growth of government spending that's driving the debt. As a matter of fact, the right way to think about this is that the national debt is the symptom. The underlying growth of government and the excessive size of government, that's the underlying disease. And because Trump is weak on that, most Republicans are falling in line.
What is the most costly component of this debt?
Oh, there's no question it's entitlements. The big three are Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. There are others. But what's happening is, especially because of demographic changes in our country, we have more and more old people and fewer young people who, of course, are the workers who finance these pay-as-you-go systems. That basically puts us in a very disturbing long-run trajectory of government growing faster than the private sector. And the private sector is what? It's the tax base. So as long as government's growing faster than the private sector, we're going to have more and more debt. And eventually, the problems you see in Greece and Italy today, we're going to suffer those problems ourselves unless we tackle the entitlements.
Compare this to previous administrations, and while we know debt has been an issue for a long time, the growth of the debt, compare that to the Obama, the Clinton administration, Bush administrations.
It frankly depends on what's happening with two factors. How fast is government spending growing and what's happening with the economy? Because whenever there's a recession, that just blows the numbers completely up, because when there's a recession, your national income falls, which means your tax revenue falls. And then you also have some means-tested programs that automatically spend more money for things like food stamps, unemployment benefits, things like that. The best data that we've gotten in recent years was probably actually under the Clinton administration, where you had government spending was fairly tightly controlled, and people in Washington, of course, say, oh, Clinton doesn't deserve credit for it, the Republicans in Congress deserve credit. I don't care about that fight. The main thing is government spending was constrained, so we got some good fiscal numbers under the Clinton administration.
There is a new Congress now. A lot of great things about this Congress, but a lot of the newer members of Congress are also pushing for more socialist policies like the ones that we see in Europe. And you alluded to the crisis that we've seen in Greece in the last decade or so. Are there any policies on the horizon that are being debated or proposed that concern you, which you would see would exacerbate the problems that we're having on our debt?
Well, this idea for a so-called Green New Deal, the price tag on that has been estimated about $40 trillion over a 10-year period. Now, that's just incomprehensible in terms of the amount of new spending and the burden that would place on the private sector of the economy. And by the way, one thing I didn't say earlier, we talk about $22 trillion and everyone's horrified by that. The unfunded liabilities, in other words, the excess of what politicians have promised compared to the amount of revenue that's coming in, that's, depending on your interest rate assumptions, more than $200 trillion. So we have a very serious long-run problem. And I'm afraid that other than trying to actually fix it by controlling the growth of spending, Trump is, in effect, he's AWOL. And Ocasio-Cortez and Sanders and some of the other politicians in Congress, they want to step on the gas pedal as we're approaching a cliff.
Well, perhaps one of the strange solutions that we've seen to this debt, a change.org petition has actually been launched to sell Montana to Canada. I don't know if you heard about this, to try and settle the U.S. debt. Number one, how viable is this even? And what's a more realistic way that we can settle the debt? It actually already has over 15,000 signatures.
Would give us more than maybe $100 million for Montana. A great state that it is, that's not going to be the solution to our fiscal problems. I think what we need to do is look around the world and see what works. And to my mind, the best example is Switzerland. They have a constitutional provision. It doesn't require a balanced budget. Instead, it's a spending cap. They call it a debt brake because if you cap spending so that spending grows slower than the private sector, you're almost automatically going to reduce government debt. Hong Kong has something similar in their basic law, which is their version of a constitution. So there are role models around the world, and even the International Monetary Fund has, in effect, endorsed these fiscal reforms in Switzerland and Hong Kong. So I think we know what works, but here's the problem. If you're a politician and, in effect, you gain popularity and buy votes by spending other people's money, why would you want to put handcuffs on yourself? Because that's what a spending cap does. It says instead of letting government grow 6% a year, it can only grow 3% a year. And that's not an easy sell for the crowd in Washington.
Dan, we got to run real quick, but you didn't bring up Switzerland. I mean, they have a very, very, very tough immigration policy. You don't expect us, to, if that's a model for us, economically speaking, that you want that as well from an immigration policy perspective. Do they go hand in hand?
Switzerland actually has one of the highest proportions of foreign-born people in their population among all the countries in the world. What Switzerland does, though, is they tend to attract and bring in the more upper income, higher educated, highly productive people. Now, are we going to do that? And by the way, Canada does that, Australia does that. I don't know that that's going to happen in the United States, but I don't even think that's critical. It's that they have a fiscal rule that limits the growth of spending. That's what matters.
All right. Dan Mitchell, chairman of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity, joining us here today. Thanks so much for the time.